I thought one of the things that you know, we might discuss, because I just returned from Israel this morning, and I'd like you to speak far more, even though you've already spoken that, because otherwise you'll just get a stream of incoherent consciousness from me having alighted from a plane, etc. But one of the things in Israel that is dominating, you know, the issues and the conversation is this whole question of the UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence, of the Palestinian recourse to the United Nations. Now, as of right now, we just checked just to make sure, Palestinians have not yet made a formal application to the United Nations. And the American administration has been engaged, particularly over the last several weeks, in trying, as Hillary Clinton said 2 days ago, that the path to peace runs through and between Jerusalem and Ramallah, and not through the UN. And that is the only way to reach peace. So we're in a situation now where I believe, unless something comes up that dissuades the Palestinians, but from my own, you know, conversation with them, that they are, for the most part, committed to going ahead. Question number one, will they go to the Security Council, or forego that because they feel that the United States has already announced that it will veto any attempt at the Security Council, or, as some of them mentioned, not forego that because they'd like to embarrass the United States, since it will be the only country that will veto, or go to the UN General Assembly, where they wouldn't be accepted as a member state, because that only the Security Council can do, but in fact would become an observer member. Or, as some have talked about, that there is an attempt, not yet by the Americans to join it, I understand, but particularly by the Europeans, to draft language for a resolution that would include reference to two states, not two states for two people, the two states, and call on the parties to go back to negotiations without any specifics, because the Palestinians are seeking a state, as you know, on the 67 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. And so the question becomes then, as you put it in your theme, what is it that can be done with regard to any of these options, and to try to maybe foreclose them if it's possible, so that we go to direct negotiations without the recourse to the UN?
Well, first let me start by saying that I think what the Palestinians have done in terms of a ploy to attract international attention has been brilliant. They've done it effectively. They've managed to get many European countries on board. Pressure has now been put on Australia, that wants a seat in the Security Council, to come on board. It's been very, very effective. They've gotten the International Criminal Court to withhold its decision on whether Palestine is a state for purposes of bringing a complaint in the International Criminal Court until the United Nations action. I saw it until about 2 or 3 weeks ago as a game of international chicken. Who would blink first? I think that Fayyad and Abbas themselves would have preferred 2 or 3 weeks ago not to have to bring the matter, certainly to the Security Council. They don't benefit. Palestine doesn't benefit from a U.S. veto, because the Palestinians really want a strong United States, a United States that's capable, in their view, of putting pressure on Israel. And so I think that they were playing a game of chicken. They were hoping that they could get the United States to pressure the Netanyahu administration to impose a freeze, a settlement freeze, and get them back to the negotiating table under circumstances that they would have tremendous advantage. I think they have lost control over it on their own street. I think it would now be impossible for Palestinian leaders to survive if they pulled back from this. They created expectations that are far too great, which is why I think that if the United Nations does accord them the status of Vatican-like observer state, the result will be violence in the streets in the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank, and in Gaza. I think that although Fayyad and Abbas don't want violence, and they've already said that all demonstrations should be limited to the middle of towns and not to the borders. The Israelis have already said they would not send their troops to the middle of towns, let there be demonstrations in the middle of towns. I think the likelihood of it getting out of control and a third intifada starting is at least substantial, because expectations among the Palestinians will be very, very high, and the accomplishments will be very, very low. It may be too late to call it off. It may be that the Palestinian leadership has overplayed its hands. The end result may very well be the end of Fayyad and the end of Abbas. It may be that they will be the first casualties of this if they raise expectations and can't satisfy those expectations. I think that's why they would like to be able to call this off and hope that they will get something that will be able to satisfy their own street, their own people. But remember, too, you can't think of this in isolation. What happened in Egypt a week ago, what happened in Jordan yesterday and today, what's happening in Turkey are emboldening the Palestinians. Now, none of these folks are going to pay for the Palestinian salaries. The Turks might think of making a larger contribution than they've been making, but essentially, Israel and the United States support the Palestinians, and both have threatened to cut off funding. And remember, too, that although the Obama administration has not threatened to cut off funding under the United States Constitution comes from Congress. And there will be a cutoff of funding from Congress. Congress will stop any funding of the Palestinian Authority if they do go for unilateral declaration. And the Obama administration won't be able to control that. Even the Speaker of the House will not be able to control that. You know, democracies are very hard to control. Just one more point, because I want to get back to conversation. But the one point I keep making when I meet with Obama, or when I meet with Hillary Clinton, I meet with President Clinton. I've been making this point to President Clinton for now 20 years, since he was first elected president. You have to understand Israel's not like Jordan or Egypt. It's a democracy, damn it, as they like to say. You can't tell Netanyahu what to do. He doesn't run the government. He's not like the President of the United States. The Prime Minister of Israel is a weak position. It's not a strong position. He is not the executive. There is no executive in Israel. If there's an executive, it's the cabinet. And he can't make the decision. I believe that Bibi Netanyahu wanted to have a settlement freeze at the time when, in the end, he couldn't bring it forward. He needed the support of his government. Now, you might say he should have been bolder and risked the government falling and done it. That's just not the way democracy works in Israel. It's very, and for that reason, I have urged Obama, if you want to affect what's going on in the Middle East, you got to go to Israel the way you went to Cairo. You have to go there. You have to tell the Israeli people, one-to-one. You have to speak to the people who count in a democracy, not the leader, the people. You got to assure them their security in relation to Hamas, in relation to Iran, in relation to the surrounding areas. You have to persuade them. You have to do a job that you did successfully when you ran and won for President of the United States. It's not enough to send Joe Biden to have dinner with Benjamin Netanyahu. You have to be the one to persuade the Israeli people that you care about them. Because right now, Barack Obama's ratings in Israel are even lower than they are in the United States, and that's very low indeed. And he has not done an effective job in conveying what I believe, and this, you're going to be critical of this, some of you will disagree with me. I do not believe that Barack Obama is anti-Israel. I believe that he is of the generation of people, however young he is, who don't have passionate support for Israel as part of their DNA. Bill Clinton would die for Israel. I mean, he would literally give his life for Israel. George Bush the second, not the first. George Bush the second would have done anything for Israel. These are people, Lyndon Johnson would have done anything for Israel. These are people who, deep in their heart, just loved and cared about Israel. Barack Obama's not one of those. I'm not sure that McCain was one of those. I don't know that this generation is among those people. He's not anti-Israel. It's just not a passion with him. And he considers it analytically. And he listens to people who give him the even-handed issue. One of his best friends was professor at Columbia who has an op-ed piece in the Times, that basically is urging him to think of Israel as just one of many players in the Middle East. So I haven't given up on this administration. What it did the other day in terms of rescuing the Israeli diplomats in Egypt showed courage and showed a determination and a willingness. Thus far, I think Ed Koch is wrong when he says that Obama has thrown Israel under the bus. From a security point of view, I can tell you from having spoken to Ehud Barak, Ehud Barak is very satisfied with the security arrangements. Let me tell you who didn't like Israel at all, and let me tell you who was the worst Secretary of Defense in modern American history, and that is Gates, the man who recently left, who was widely admired and loved in the United States and around the world. He was an awful, awful Secretary of Defense. He was the one who willfully and deliberately and verbally took the military option off the table with Iran. And yet he knew how to play the game politically. And I'm hoping that the new Secretary of Defense will have a more realistic view of international politics. So I think it's very much a mixed picture. And they say the prophecy ended with the destruction of the Second Temple. I think that nobody could prophesy what's going to happen as the result of the UN. But if I had to make a guess, I would bet they would go to the General Assembly. They would try to make a deal, get the United States to abstain, perhaps, at the General Assembly vote, and not bring it in front of the Security Council, and try to damp down the expectations within the Palestinian Authority, and use it as an opportunity to bring both parties back to the negotiating table. But remember, don't let anybody ever forget, the Israeli position is clear. They are now willing to negotiate with no preconditions immediately. If the Palestinians have said no to that, but if you ask 99% of the people, including the editorial writers of the New York Times, they will tell you that it's the Israelis that refuse to negotiate. The Palestinians want to negotiate. That is just a falsification of history.
Alan, you're absolutely that Netanyahu's position, the Israeli position, has been always direct negotiations without preconditions. Now, I met with Abbas at the beginning of this year, and my executive assistant, Howard Liebman, was with me. I just want to mention Howard because he is the best chief of staff that anybody's ever had. And I brought up with Abbas, I said, why don't you enter into direct negotiations with Israel, with Bibi and Netanyahu? And his answer to me was, well, President, and then he brought up the issue of the settlements. And I said, well, Bibi Netanyahu had a 10-month settlement freeze. You still didn't negotiate with him. Why are you making the settlements an obstacle? They never were an obstacle in any of the negotiations with any of the other Israeli leaders before. Why make that an obstacle? He said, look, President Obama called for a settlement freeze. How can I be less pro-Palestinian than President Obama? So I then said to him, well, even President Obama no longer calls for that settlement freeze, which I think Alan may have had something to do with that change of position. But this brings up the question here. I know you wrote critically of President Obama's position on that. Do you think that that also is part of the intergenerational thing? In other words, Obama approaches things sometimes as part of a generation and their viewing of the settlements as being it's the settlements and nothing else?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do. I think that is partly part of it. When people ask me, do I think Obama's heart's in the wrong place, my response is no, his brain's in the wrong place. He just hasn't been smart about this. When you make a speech, and the result is the Palestinians move further away and the Israelis move further away, it's not about your heart. And I don't know who's advising him, but every time he does something, he seems to set back the process. Exactly the point you made. I had the same response when I met with Fayyad. He was saying, I can't be less Palestinian than the President of the United States. I mean, even there, let me give you one example, how it could have been different. When you say that Israel and the Palestinians should start at the 67 borders and then have agreed upon land swaps, understand what you're saying. What you're saying is you start with the Kotel, the Western Wall, being part of Palestine. You start with Hebrew University being cut off from Israel because the access road is part of Palestine. You start with the Jewish quarter being part of Palestine. Forget about Ma'ale Adumim. Those three elements, can you imagine any Israeli government, even if a communist got in, giving up, saying we start by negotiating to get back the Kotel, to get back Hebrew University, and to get back the Jewish quarter? Let me tell you what Fayyad's position on this is. It's very interesting. He said, we will swap for the Kotel. But he says to me, Alan, you're smart. What's the definition of the value of real estate? Location, location, location. What can be better located than the Kotel? You want the Kotel back? It's 1 dunam, the Kotel. You've got to give us 10,000 acres for that. It's not a matter of dunam for dunam. It's value for value. So if you start by giving the Palestinians 3 of the most sacred and valuable parts of what is traditional Israel, you're making it impossible to negotiate. What if the Palestinians say, we don't want land swaps? We don't want to negotiate. Does it mean that all those things stay within Palestine? So if he had just said that 242, which I helped to draft back in 1967 with Justice Goldberg, which contemplated territorial adjustments without any land swaps, which contemplated Israel keeping the Jewish quarter, Israel keeping the access, Israel keeping the latrine area so that buses and cabs don't have to zigzag around, that required Israel to keep several hundred square whatever of land before you even begin negotiations, and then say land swaps over Ma'ale Adumim, land swaps over Gilo, land swaps over the settlements. It would have been so different. And when I spoke to Obama's people, they said, oh, that's what he meant. He never intended for Israel to start out with the Kotel and those things. Well, why didn't he say it? That would have changed everything. Or if he had said, look, Israel has territories, and that's what they have to give up. The Palestinians they claim the right to return. That's what they have to give up. It should start with Israel going back to pre-67 with these territorial swaps, and the Palestinians giving up their right to return. Then there's a negotiation for everything else. But at the moment, what you're saying is Israel has to start from 0 and negotiate everything it wants. The Palestinians don't have to put anything on the table. He never asks the Palestinians to do anything, which makes it harder to negotiate. And he's just not a great negotiator. That became obvious when we looked at some of the economic issues in front of Congress. He was an ineffective negotiator. So I have no complaints about his heart. And as a professor at Harvard Law School, where he graduated with honors, I have to tell you, I have complaints about how he has effectuated what I think is well-intentioned efforts to try to bring about peace.
Alan.